Hi everybody, my name is Soneja, and I serve my AAAS fellowship at the U.S. Agency for International Development, also known as USAID, which is the main agency for U.S. foreign assistance. I also served for a period at the U.S. Embassy in Rome, Italy. I'm an engineer and public health scientist by training, and fully recognize the power of scientific discovery to change things. But when I first heard the AAAS motto of "Be a force for science," I have to admit, my first thoughts were, this is really dorky. What I did not expect was to encounter folks that had an incredible amount of optimism as beneficiaries of investment in science, and how they would reinvigorate my optimism and make me recognize that I need to be a Force for Science champion too. So while at USAID, I got to spend a part of it in Liberia. It is one of the poorest countries on earth, and its citizens have experienced devastating events such as civil war, food scarcity, and deadly epidemics. With limited infrastructure, such as having 90% of its roads unpaved, it's got a long way to go in terms of its development. Now, USAID and other organizations have been making strategic investments in Liberia that are helping to advance its scientific capacity, that are intended to enable them to deal with many of these issues on their own, thus ultimately helping to advance greater stability in the region. For example, I learned about investments in mobile money. In the past, government workers had to travel far distances over hazardous roads to banks to collect their salaries that then may not even have any cash on hand, thus forcing them to miss several days from work, which in turn affects retention and productivity, on top of potentially having to pay bribes along their journey, which further reduces their retained income. Thanks to investments in mobile salary payments, workers don't have to waste time or put themselves in danger to get paid, and mobile money is also helping to cut down on corruption too. Another example, and what I worked on, is the strengthening of health systems so that health shocks, like the 2014 Ebola outbreak in West Africa that killed nearly 30,000 people, don't occur again. The Ebola outbreak exposed major weaknesses in Liberia's ability to address infectious disease outbreaks on their own. Investments being made to enable mobile communication between its 6,000 government healthcare workers, many of which are in remote locations, and additional efforts to strengthen digital disease surveillance are positioning Liberians to be less reliant on foreign aid and reduces the potential of an infectious disease outbreak in one region spreading to other parts of the world. Now, on the surface, investing in science to propel those things sounds great, but the power of those statements didn't really register until I was on the ground in Liberia, working with health and education workers, USAID Liberian staff, or even the local embassy driver, when I really started to appreciate what investments in scientific funding meant. Not just for working with Liberians to prevent disease outbreaks or getting them paid on time, but also how working together on science and tech has instilled in them an infectious and profound sense of optimism. That seeing progress in scientific capacity propels their optimism and drive to keep working to improve their country. Through my interactions with colleagues during my fellowship, I've learned about so many amazing examples where science is contributing towards increasing optimism. For example, I learned about things like how, despite climate change emerging as a major threat to development across the continent of Africa, smallholder farmers are embracing climate-smart innovations that could help fuel a dramatic increase in food production and build agricultural resiliency to climate shocks. Or while serving at the US Embassy in Italy and getting to see firsthand how multiple countries are engaging in science and diplomacy to significantly advance the field of particle physics at the Gran Sasso National Laboratory. I can keep going, or how about a 20-year research study that won a Golden Goose Award and was funded by the National Institutes of Health that shaped the national conversation around adolescent health and its importance to lifelong health and well-being. Can't stop, won't stop, or utilizing blockchain as a proof of concept to ensure the accurate reporting of results for elections in Sierra Leone. One last example, we're using evidence-based approaches to create effective international trade policy. Well, maybe those policies need some more scientific advice. Getting the opportunity to interact with incredibly smart and passionate people in different parts of the world that are committed towards the advancement of scientific and societal progress has really inspired me. I've come to know about so many amazing things going on in science and how they are really making a difference in people's lives and contributing towards advancing a collective optimism. Now, I'll admit that by nature, I'm an optimistic person, and some may think I'm being naive, or perhaps even buying a bit too much into that hopey, changey stuff. But these anecdotal experiences, interactions during my fellowship, and seeing firsthand the direction where things are going have reinvigorated my optimism and reinforced that making progress relies on the interrelationship and cyclical nature of how investment in scientific funding drives discovery, and that communicating that discovery and the change it represents in ways people can understand drives optimism, which then drives continued interest to fund more science. We live in a world that has many issues, such as wide gaps in wealth and socioeconomic status, and one where we are facing ever-increasing threats, such as a rising culture of anti-science. Despite that, my fellowship experience has reaffirmed my optimism that the melding of science and policy can take on all these challenges. Science is a system for exploration and innovation, and is the engine of progress and prosperity. It can fire our imagination, promote cooperation, fuel economic growth, and most importantly, serve as a symbol of hope. So to the folks at AAAS that came up with the Be a Force for Science motto, I apologize, nice job. To my fellow scientists, become engaged. Talk to policymakers, and more importantly, the public, to make them understand how scientific achievements in your fields are making a difference, and to recognize how it is driving optimism for continued progress. My fellow scientists, as you continue to work towards bigger and better things, keep being a force for science, but more importantly, be a force for optimism. Thank you.